We've all been there. You start a new world, toss a few chests down, and within 20 minutes you've created an unsortable chest monster. Then you see these wild solutions, massive walls of items or AE systems, covered in glowing LEDs, and wonder, is this really the best way to store my stuff? How do you even go from that chaos to something like this? And in this video, I'm going to show you my optimal setups for early, mid, and late game storage, and how to transition smoothly between them without tearing apart everything that you've built. So let's start at the complete basics. This is probably what you've started off with, just a bunch of chests that's kind of got out of hand in a weird square like this. And don't worry, that's fine, because we're going to be upgrading them. And the way that you upgrade them is going from basic to iron to gold, diamond, and then netherite. And each time you add an upgrade, it adds additional space here. So as you can see, we're going all the way up to netherite. Now obviously these upgrades get more and more expensive as you go down. You can build these chests by scratch by just simply crafting a regular chest, whacking a redstone torch next to it, and you will have the first tier of chest. Do note that you can also do this in one recipe by just crafting and putting a redstone torch inside, and you'll get the chest with the wood type that you've used. So in this case, we've actually got the spruce chest instead of the oak chest. If you use a regular chest in the crafting, you'll always end up with an oak chest. The basic tier is really useful because it has this sort functionality and a click to search function. The click to search function is actually really useful because you can just do regular searching, and if you switch out of this chest and go to another, it will also have this. So if you've got a massive wall like this, you can just right click through all of them until you find your spruce planks. You can also use the same JEI setting. So if I type in a mod with the @ symbol, so for example sophisticated storage, which is what this item's from, it shows me all of the items from this specific mod. Using that chest, I can then combine iron around it to get the iron variant of this chest. Or if I've already placed it in the world, I can get the basic to iron tier upgrade, which just requires a redstone torch surrounded by iron. And then when I whack that on, it will now turn into the iron chest. Meaning that you don't have to completely remove all of your chests just to upgrade them. Now do note, if you're going to use these upgrades and you've got a double chest, you are going to require 2, obviously. So when it uses it, you can see it upgrades it, but it does use 2 of the upgrades. And wow, check out that space. That's just from 2 of the iron tier upgrades. So you don't necessarily need to go all the way up to netherite tier, just make more chests that are iron. And then gradually when you get the materials, you can then upgrade them to the gold, and then, diamond, netherite, etc. Another thing to know in the basic tier is you get this upgrade slot in the top left corner, and every time you go up a tier, you'll get an additional upgrade slot. Now there are tons of upgrades to choose from. If I just type in @sof, as in sophisticated storage, and upgrade, you'll see there's an absolute ton here. I've highlighted some of the more notable ones. For example, this is the hopper upgrade, which basically pretends that the chest is a hopper. So it'll pull items from the block on top and pushes them to the block below. There's also the smelting upgrade, where if you click it, you've now got a furnace inside your chest. You've got a crafting table upgrade, stone cutter, etc. You can even have a magnet upgrade, so when I throw items near a chest, it will pick them up straight away. There's also upgraded versions, so that smelting upgrade I showed earlier has an auto smelting on, which will pull or push items into that smelting upgrade. There are also upgrades such as the void upgrade, where I can actually place items in here, and if they enter this chest, they'll be removed, but other items won't. This is really useful for a mob farm when you've got a bit too many of one item, or you just need to get rid of like arrows or something useless. The advanced one allows for even more filtering options. So for example, you've got matching the item, the mod, any specific tags that are on something, and you've obviously got more slots here available. So my first upgrade would actually be to turn all of your existing chests into the basic or iron tier sophisticated storage one. So now we've upgraded, and you can see we've got a lot more space. You can also do the exact same with barrels, so that you've got it all as a 1 block item. This is really useful if, for example, you've got a block over a chest, you can't actually open it, but if you've got a block over a barrel, you can. Also, using the decoration table, you can actually customize the look of the barrels. So for example, I've put a barrel in here, this slot here, and let's say I've got a build that uses a lot more red colours. So I can now put an item or block in there, and you'll see it will change the decoration to match that block. And depending on where I put this block, it'll actually affect different parts. You can also mix and match. So right now I've got this crimson stem and the cherry planks, so I've got this strange amalgamation of colours. So I can really customise this barrel. And when I take it out and plop it down, you'll see I've still got the same functionality as I did before, but I've got something that might match my theme a little bit better. Now the great thing about the sophisticated storage mod is there's also the backpack equivalent. I actually believe it came before. The backpack's really simple, requiring leather, string, and just a regular chest in the middle. And it also has the exact same upgrades, but they're a backpack equivalent. So they're crafted just a little bit different, but they act the exact same. And again, you can also upgrade the backpack like before. The backpack can either be placed in your inventory and right click to open, you can pop it on your chest plate slot, or you can put it specifically in the Curio's back slot, and you can access that by this up here. You can set an open backpack hotkey, and that way you can open your backpack using it. I personally have E as my open inventory key, and I have Shift E as my backpack key, meaning that it's the exact same way to open up my inventory, and I can just Shift E to use this. So in my opinion, this works really well, and it saves you having a dedicated keybind just for opening your backpack. The next storage option I'd also consider are these portable storage units. They start off with the tier 1, which holds up to 8 different items and 255 of each. And this is really useful because if you hold right click, you can then add items into this. And again, it has a max stack of 255. One of the specific reasons I like this is because if I have an item set in here, so for example this cobblestone, and it's thrown on the ground, or if let's say I'm mining and I pick up some cobble, it will go straight into this pocket storage. However, do note if it reaches that 255, any additional cobblestone will actually be voided. And if you're getting to that stage, you should probably upgrade it to the tier 2 version, holding 16 items and 4,095 of each. Just requires some gold, pistons and chests. The cool thing about this is that if I have items in here and I want to put them in my chest over here, I can shift right click and it will put all of the items back there. So if I've gone mining, it's actually really useful to have this as like cobblestone, cobble deep slate, or even some of the raw materials that you're going to have a lot of, like lapis, copper, or anything like that. And if you want to pick up any of the items from a chest, you can shift left click and it will put them all back in. So at this point in the playthrough, you've probably ended up making a base or somewhere so that your chests aren't just going to be out in the middle of nowhere. If you craft the packing tape, which requires slime and paper, you can right click one of your chests and it will place tape over it. You won't be able to access the chest anymore, but what you can do is now break it. And once broken, it drops the whole chest as an item with its contents still inside. You can then walk over to where you want to place it and you'll see a small outline of where it's going to be placed. So let's say over here, I want to place it like that. And now I've got the exact same contents here and it removes the packing tape. Now, obviously for a double chest, it's going to use 2 of the uses instead of 1. You can then move your setup really quickly to somewhere else without having to break and leave all these items on the floor or cause any other problems. So the next thing I would end up making in the process is a storage controller. It's not a difficult recipe, but it does require comparators, which require quartz, which means you probably have to go to the nether. But once you've got one, you can place it down next to any adjacent chests, and the contents of any adjacent chest will now be displayed in this controller. You might be thinking, why is this useful? Well, like before, we can shift right click into here with our pocket storage, but I can also do this from my inventory. So if I put some of the cherry planks and crimson stems in here and I right click them into here, you'll see it disappears. And I actually double right clicked there. So if you right click once with the item, it will go in. If you double click, it will actually check your whole inventory for any matching items and put them in the corresponding chests, meaning that depositing stuff becomes so much simpler. You can do a mining trip, come back up, double right click here, and then just walk away. And that's cool and all, but what if you've got a chest over here that's not directly adjacent or connected to this group of chests here? Well, that's where the storage tool comes in handy, and this requires an ender pearl. So if you look at my title bar just above the hotbar, you'll see if I right click this, it will now link to this specific controller. And any chests that are in the vicinity, I can now right click and it will be linked into the controller. So it means they no longer have to be adjacent. And I can actually link as many chests or barrels or anything here that I would like to. It also has a pretty decent range. So for example, I can come all the way out here and I should be able to right click it. And you can see even at that distance, it connects to this controller. And we'll test that by just putting in some of our gold to diamond upgrades. And if I double right click, or if I just right click singly with this in my hand, they will go into that chest over here. Now, just a quick note, there is still a range of this block, and I don't believe it can be upgraded, but it's about, I don't know what this is, but about 15 blocks. It's a good distance away, but for example, this one over here doesn't connect, so there is still a limit. There is, however, another mod that has a lot larger limits that we'll get into very shortly. I'll also add a brief note, there is this storage link as well, crafted either using the storage controller with an ender pearl or its own little recipe here. And this works if you've got a multi-block of chests, so similar to how all of these are adjacent, what I can do is place down this, right click there, and now all of these blocks act as one big block that now go into that controller, if that makes sense. So instead of having to link all of these up manually, I can just use the storage link and have them all connected like adjacent to each other, and that will work instead. And again, we can test this out by putting in the gold diamond upgrades, right click in there, and they will all go in there. And we'll get to this in a minute. I want to talk about the barrels for a second. So a lot of people have seen these barrels before. They've probably seen the functional storage version. If you're very new to this, you might not have even seen these before, but a lot of people aren't aware that they have the exact same equivalent as these oak drawers from functional storage in the sophisticated storage mod. The interesting part is that obviously these all connect. So this whole wall of items here with the drawers, the chests, the barrels, everything inside connects to this one storage controller. And you can see when I hover over it, you can actually see all of the items that are appearing just up here, or just a slice of the items that are appearing. They're not particularly difficult to craft. They're called limited oak barrels, or whatever wood type you're using. And it comes in many different variants. You've got the I version, the II version, which is this little double one down here, the 3 I's, and then the IV. I'm going to stop using Roman numerals now. And how these barrels and drawers work is that if you right click it with an item, it will now store that one specific type of item. And I can shift right click and see that item with a different count and a fill meter. So this is mostly for when you've got bulk storage of a single item or single different types of items. And similar to the controller, if I right click, it will take it, and if I double right click, everything in my inventory goes into this. I've also got these 2 variants, and I can then store multiple different items like that. And if I go inside, you'll see that the count is split between these 2 slots. Exactly the same as the third barrel, and despite this being a larger section, it actually splits it evenly between all 3 slots. And the same with the fourth. This is where I get to talk about stack upgrades. Stack upgrades go from tier 1 all the way up to tier 5, and they are a progressive craft, meaning that you need the first one to craft the next one. So iron, then to gold, then to diamond, and then into netherite. And it will multiply the number of stacks by that specific tier. And you can actually use these in a regular chest. You'll see it will multiply the stack that can fit in a slot by 4. So in this case, you actually have 256 of that specific item can be stored in that slot. The neat part is if you just sort this inventory, it will do it all for you. And if you try to take out this, it obviously won't let you until you split up this stack, and then it will let you. So for example, now I've got it all below 64, I can now pull out this item and sort it again. This also works for the barrels. So for example, here we've got only 2048. If I add that, it will multiply that by 4. Not only that, I can actually upgrade the tier of the barrel, similar to the chests that we saw before, and that will do it further. So I could have the gold, then to diamond tier, and it will actually extend the count number as well as giving me more slots to upgrade. Now for those who are familiar with functional storage, I'm going to explain the compacting drawer, but I'm going to use it using sophisticated storage. It has its own version. And there are a lot of recipes that you get where you can compress items down. So for example, you can turn iron nuggets into iron and then back into the nugget form. You can also compress it further, so you can have iron ingots into blocks and then also back. Technically in all the mods, you can also even do this further, so now you've got a block of iron 1 times. And what the compression upgrade does is I can put it in one of these drawers. So for example, I'll do the iron nuggets and I can put this anywhere I like. And right now it will show me the iron ingots and the iron nuggets. I can put this in this slot and it will show me the iron ingots and then the compressed version again. And if I do this in the 4 times barrel, I can put it in here and then I get those 1x iron blocks in the top left and then regular blocks and iron ingots here. The cool part about this is that I can add blocks of iron and be able to pull it out in the form of iron ingots. Same with iron nuggets, and the same with these compressed blocks. This can be really useful, so it means that you don't have to uncompress your blocks or recompress your blocks. So that's great. You've got a whole entire wall of different things. You've got your chests, you've got drawers, you've got these limited barrels that I showed off a minute ago, but in my opinion it looks a little bit garish. Some of these chests might be upgraded to diamond, and I just don't like the look of this. So the storage tool that I showed earlier has different modes, and I can shift and scroll to show these different modes. So right now I can show and hide locks, I can show and hide counts, I can lock/unlock. The locking functionality is actually pretty useful to show off, so I'll quickly show that as well. If I pull out every single bit of cyan wool, no block is now in there, so I can put anything else in its place. And maybe this is just specifically for cyan wool. So what I can do is shift and scroll to the locking/unlocking and lock this, and now when I pull out of the drawer, you'll see it stays in there. There's a ghost item in there. So if I try to right click with a different item, it wouldn't let me. And if I double right click, obviously all of the cyan wool that was in my inventory goes into that barrel anyway. But some of the other features might be that I want to show and hide these counts. So for example, all these counts here, this 64. So what I'm able to do is right click on the individual barrel to remove these counts, or I can just right click on the storage controller and anything that's connected is now affected. There's a fill level, and usually this is disabled by default, but maybe I want this. So now I can see the fill level of every single one of my drawers. So here my cobblestone is full, so I might want to pull out some and maybe put it somewhere else. You might also want to get rid of all this trim, so there's a show/hide tier option. And once I right click it, you can see all of the tiers are gone. So now we have a bit more of an aesthetically pleasing storage wall. Now this is the part where you can customize it however you want, whether you like the counts, don't like the counts, the fill levels, or even the tiers as well. So for my regular chest storage, I definitely prefer the sophisticated storage mod. It's really nice. But when it comes to drawers, I honestly prefer the functional storage mod, and I'll get to why. So the functional storage mod allows you to add upgrades in a similar manner. You can either right click them on, or you can shift right click, open the inventory, and then add them back in. But you'll see the upgrades are actually significantly better. So for example, the copper upgrade multiplies the item storage of this block by 8 times, whereas if I get the basic copper stack upgrade, which is almost the same material cost, that only does 3. So 2 of those copper upgrades are already better than a netherite barrel with just 1 of the iron ones. And secondly, you've also got fluid drawers, so you can add fluids in here, and they also connect up to the storage drawers. The compacting drawers that I showed off earlier have the exact same functionality, but this is a solitary object. Here's the recipe for that over here. You've also got this smaller simple compacting drawer, and this allows you to still do the same iron thing that I showed before, but there's also some really handy recipes. So for example, I can have nether quartz here, which allows me to take blocks of nether quartz out and put them back and still get the nether quartz back. I can also do this with amethyst, so if I right click there, I can take out amethyst blocks, put them back in, or take out amethyst shards. So that means you don't have to use any crushing or squeezing recipes to get the item that you want back. Now the way that the controller works is slightly different. It doesn't do the adjacent blocks thing. You need to get a linking tool. You right click the storage controller, and then you can right click all of your drawers here to connect them to the same thing. And that is the exact same as clicking your storage tool and linking up all of these. You can change the mode by just right clicking to remove instead of add, and you can shift right click to change it from single to multiple mode. So if I have it back on add and multiple mode, I can click one, and then I get this bounding box around all the things that I want to select. So if I've got a big wall of drawers, for example, I can then do that and add all of them in one swoop. And there we go. If I look at my storage controller, I can now see all of my iron blocks. I can see the lava and the amethyst stuff. You can also use the framed drawers to add customization to your barrels. So for example, I can have a cobblestone looking barrel here, or swap out one of the blocks here to get this mossy cobble inside. And that works the exact same as what I showed previously with the sophisticated barrel. There's not as much customization options, but it's still really useful. Similarly to the storage tool, you can also have a configuration tool. The configuration tool is the exact same as the storage tool, but if I shift right click, I can show different things exactly the same as the storage tool. So maybe I want to hide the item renders, I can do that as well. I can get rid of the upgrades, I can get rid of the amounts. I can also do the same locking thing that I showed earlier. Now, one of the main reasons I prefer using the functional storage controller is because of the range. So this is, for example, the range that you get with the basic version. But unlike the sophisticated storage controller, you can actually upgrade this. So if I add some copper upgrades in here, I'm going to add 3 as an example, you can see that the range extends incredibly. I've actually gone completely outside my little walkway and it extends all the way down here, so I could have a farm over here and it would still be connected to those controllers. One of the things I actually really love about the functional storage is you can also use these upgrades. There's quite a few of them, similar to the sophisticated storage. You've got a pusher upgrade and a puller upgrade. So for example, I've got this drawer here full of cobblestone. If I put a chest above it, I can use this pusher upgrade and right click it so that it pushes up into the front. And if I pop that in, you'll see it takes the items and puts them into this chest. Or maybe I want to actually do the opposite and pull them back into the chest. So I can do this, I can have it facing up and use the puller upgrade, and it will now suck in those cobblestone items. There's also upgrades for the fluid drawers, so I can have a water generator, or I can have the dripping upgrade, which requires the pointed dripstone. Pop that in a drawer and it will actually generate lava passively over time. You can see it's at 7.1 buckets of lava. You can even combine those dripping upgrades with a water generator upgrade, place down a drawer with an obsidian generator upgrade, and that will slowly passively generate obsidian into this drawer. So I've had that running for 5 minutes now and it's generated 21 obsidian, so it is quite slow, but you can always add a whole row and now it will generate obsidian 3 times as quick, or actually it does it in the same time but it generates 3 instead of 1. You don't always have to use those copper upgrades. There's gold, there's diamond, and there's netherite upgrades. The only reason I do is because you can add multiple of the same upgrade, and copper is just one of those materials you have in abundance in all the mods 10. One thing I haven't shown off is the controller access points. I can have a controller access point and link it to my already existing controller, and I now have access to my items from a completely different source. So that means I can either input items from here or I can actually extract them. So for example, I've got the cobblestone here. I'm going to use this access point and right click, and it will drop all of that cobblestone from this chest here, and I can also just right click it and it will go back in. Crazy. And because of my ridiculous range, I could even have that working down there. I'll also note that the sophisticated storage has its own storage I/O input output, and it does the exact same as that. So like I said, it really doesn't matter what type of storage you use. I actually tend to use chests mostly with the sophisticated storage controller, and for my drawers I use functional storage with its own controller. There's also the Armory cabinet. Now it acts completely separate to the storage controller. You can't link it, it's a completely separate item, and what this does is it stores armor and weapons, and it can store a lot of them, 4096. And it also doesn't have a way to actually input items. So if I right click here, for example, all it's doing is switching my armor. It doesn't actually right click into the armory. The only way to access it is through external sources. So if I whack a hopper on top, I can then add all of my armor. Problem is the only way to access this again is either using something that I'll show later, which involves terminals, or you have to use hoppers and pipes again. So here. Now I'm going to give a massive disclaimer. The intention of the Armory cabinet is mostly just to store a few of these items. These are items with MBT, durability, basically things that can be enchanted, have apothic enchantments added to them, or maybe some other customizable means such as like names or whatever. I really wouldn't use 4,000 slots here because what can happen is if this overfills with too much data, it can actually corrupt your chunk. And if this happens, the chunk that the item is in will actually completely destroy itself and be reset to when it first spawned into the world. So if you had this in the middle of your base and added way too many items with too much data on it, you might suddenly find a hole in the middle of your base. So feel free to use this to just store regular items, just don't plug in a direct source of these items into the Armory cabinet. But if I've scared you off with that idea, then fair enough, you don't have to use this. So now onto the late early game. I've made a minified setup here where I've got a storage controller connected to a few of your chests, and a storage controller connected to all of these drawers, and I guess an Armory cabinet over here as well. And I want an easier way to access all of these without just going into the chests and directly picking what I want. And this is the idea of an accessor. How do I access all the content inside of it? One of the earliest ways you can do it is through RF tools called the storage scanner, crafted with redstone torches, ender pearls, and a machine frame here. So not a particularly difficult recipe, but it does also need power. So in this case, I'm using a creative energy cell. You then plunk it down into the world and increase the radius of the storage that it's going to be scanning. Now do note this can go pretty big, 20 blocks. And all I really need to add are the storage controllers itself. So I right click here saying that they're routable or routable depending on the way that you speak. So now if I go back up to the top and press all routable inventories, I can now see all of my items from my drawer controller and also from my chests here, so all of this wall type. And if I want to pick them out, I can just shift click and it'll pull out one item. If I want to pull out the whole stack, I can just left click in general. And then if I just shift click back in, they will go back in as well. But oh no, look what happened. All of my wool has now gone into my drawers. One thing to note is by locking all of your drawers, nothing new can go in here unless you manually right click a new item onto there. And if you then pull it all out, it will still show that placeholder item. The way that you can get rid of this item is by unlocking the drawer using the config tool, left clicking one more time and you will now remove the placeholder. Right click again to lock the drawer. So now time to talk about something a bit strange called priority. Different mods add their own little ways of having priority managed, but what that basically means is if I had a line of chests here, which one is it going to go into first? Now the storage controller does it based on where you rank it in the table. So you can see that my Armory cabinet and the storage controller are much before the sophisticated storage controller. So what it's going to try and do is add it into this. Then if it can't fit in there, add it into this, and then if it can't fit in there, add it to this. And since all of these items are locked, if I now try to add anything here, it will now put it in its correct place, so in these chests. And so if I try to add my cobblestone, what will happen is because it's in the second priority, it will try here, then try here, there is a space for it, so it goes into this drawer. It won't go into this, unless, if this drawer gets full, so it has a 2000 capacity, what's going to happen when I add more in? Well, it's not going to be able to fit it in here. It's not going to be able to fit it in here because there's no more space. It will actually go into the gold chests. So as an example, it's now filled up here, but I don't want this to happen. So this is where there's two ways to avoid this. Number one is just simply upgrading the amount of storage that the cobblestone drawer can actually hold, but the other one is a void upgrade. Now, do you remember that pocket storage I showed earlier when you tried to add more than the amount? It just voided them, it just deleted them. That's exactly the same as what this void upgrade does. It requires obsidian and a drawer, but once you place it onto a drawer, if I now add all of this, it will actually accept those items and just void them. So now I'm not going to end up with any cobblestone in my system because it's always going to go in here and always going to be voided. I can still also add all of my copper upgrades here because if I shift right click onto the edge of the barrel, I can see that it's got the void upgrade in the utility slot and this in the storage slot. So I've upgraded it and I can still add more in here. But once it reaches that threshold of 131,000 items, it's then just going to delete any more cobblestone that comes through. Void upgrades are really important. If you're producing too much of a resource from, let's say, a cobblestone farm or a tree farm and it fills up, it's going to end up going into your main storage system and clogging it all up. So make sure your priorities are right and have the drawer controller fill up way before the storage controller. Make sure you lock all of your items here and put any void upgrades on things that you don't want to overflow into these other chests. I'll show two other methods of early game storage access. The first one being with the integrated dynamics mod. Now you'll find these mineral trees. They're not too uncommon. There's one over here where it's the mineral leaves. And the way that you grow them is by having an X shape here, placing a mineral sapling and using bone meal. Ta-da! You can harvest it using the Ultimine key and it then drops saplings, sticks, mineral berries, which you can eat, and then mineral logs. You might also get some crystallized mineral chunks from this. So what we're going to need is the storage terminal, logic cables, and the item interface. And these are made with those crystallized mineral chunks. Same with the logic cable. The storage terminal, well, that's where things get a little bit confusing. You really don't get many of these crystallized mineral chunks, so we're going to have a way that farms more. This is where the squeezer comes in. If I place a log into the squeezer and then manually jump on the top of it, what will happen is it will squeeze that into mineral resin. If I put a drying basin to the side of it, it will fill it up with mineral resin, and then if I wait about 30 seconds, it will dry into a mineral block. Ta-da, it's now a block of crystallized mineral. So if I now plop that into my crafting table, I now get 9 crystallized mineral chunks. I can reset the squeezer by just having a redstone signal touch it, so in this case I've got a button here that resets it. And I can then go back to squeezing by jumping all over this and getting it to go into the drying basin. There are mechanical versions of this that use redstone flux/energy to work, but if you just want to automate this basic squeezer, the easiest way you can do it is by placing a armor stand on it, having a redstone clock, and then jumping on it, which will then ping this armor stand back up and down. You'll see this armor stand is only having enough weight to do maybe halfway before it gets reset. You actually need to put 2 down, so whilst it's in the air, you have to shift right click another one on, and now you've got 2 armor stands, and now it has enough power to squeeze all the way down. This is when you can now add your mineral logs, and it will squeeze them like that, automatically. And you could put hoppers in underneath this drying basin so it pulls out and extracts the crystallized mineral. You could also add a hopper into the squeezer so that it now puts the logs in for you. Now, I found out about this from a guy on YouTube called Pilpoh during his Let's Play series, so a massive shout out to him for this double armor stand method. To get the mineral glass, what you need to do is put in some glass whilst it's all hardening the mineral resin, and you'll get the mineral glass instead of the crystallized way. And you can do it like so, putting a log down there, squeezing it out like this, and then right click with a glass, and that will harden into the mineral glass. So once you've got all of those items, what you need to do is put your item interfaces on any kind of interface that's going to be able to accept and drop in items. Then you need to connect it up via logic cable so that all of these inventories are connected, and then put a storage terminal. And now we have access, if I go to the item storage, I now have access to all of my items. But we still need to talk about priority. The way that you set priority is on the item interface itself. You can right click it and then set its priority to higher or lower depending on where it wants to be. So as an example, I've just made that a higher priority. If I now put in the cobblestone, it will go back into the drawer rather than these chests over here. One of my favorite ways is also by using Ars Nouveau. With Ars Nouveau, what you need to get is the storage lectern, the bookworm charm, and a dominion wand. Now that sounds confusing, especially when you look at the recipe requiring this enchanting apparatus. So I'll give you a quick rundown on what you need to do. First of all, you need to craft these imbuement chambers out of archwood logs. Now, archwood logs are those strange colourful trees you'll see on the minimap. So here's one, blazing archwood leaves over here. There's a blue one over here called the cascading archwood. And I think that's all that I can see on my map right now. Any of those logs will do. You just need to turn them into archwood planks. Whack it with some gold and you've got an imbuement chamber. Pop the imbuement chamber down into the world. And you can have it on the side, you can have it down, either way like that. And you can either add lapis or amethyst to it, and it will turn them into source gems. You can also add an amethyst block instead of amethyst to get a source block, which is 4 of the regular source gems. That's now completed, so you'll see we'll have source gems here, and we've got the source block that I said earlier. You then need to make the enchanting apparatus, which is source stone, just 1 source gem surrounded by stone, an arcane core, and some arcane pedestals. I've crafted 8 here because that's the maximum, but you can really get away with 4 or 3 for this case. You place down the arcane core with an enchanting apparatus on top, and then surround it with pedestals. And the way the enchanting apparatus works is that you need to put any item on the outside of this center item onto the pedestals and then right click it with the center item. So in this case we need 2 source gems and 1 gold, and right click it with a stick. So here I place my gold, I place my source gems, and then I right click with a stick. And this will then do an animation and it will finally craft me the dominion wand. The storage lectern is just chests, and then you right click with a lectern instead. Once you've got it, hold on to it because we're going to be using this later. You then need this bookworm charm, and the way that you get that is by using a tablet of awakening, a ritual brazier, and a book and quill. The brazier is a simple recipe. The tablet of awakening requires specifically the green log, and then every single type of sapling of the different coloured trees, and 4 source gems. And the book and quill is just Minecraft book and quill. If you right click the brazier on the ground, right click with the tablet of awakening, then right click with the book, and then right click again, it will spawn in that bookworm charm. Trust me, this is worth it. I know it sounds confusing. So now we should have all of those items. We have the storage lectern, we have the bookworm charm, and we have the dominion wand. What you need to do is place down the storage lectern, right click it with a bookworm charm, and you'll see this little guy pop up. And now you can connect any inventories to this storage lectern. Now for every bookworm you can have 8 inventories connected. But in this case, these controllers act as only 1 inventory. So in this case, we'll only be using 3 of the slots. We've got the cabinet, we've got this controller, and we've got the storage controller. And just a pre-warning, the way that priority works with the Ars Nouveau storage lectern is it's based on which inventory you connected first. So in this case, if we want the order to be Armory cabinet, then the drawers, and then the sophisticated storage, we have to do it in that order. We do that by right-clicking on the controller, and then we right-click the storage lectern. And you can see it connects the inventory. In that case, this one doesn't want to connect, so we actually have to use shift right click, and then you right click again, and same with the last controller as well. So this is the storage lectern interface. As you can see, it looks really similar to the Applied Energistics or refined storage interface. And it can also sync with JEI, so if I type in cobblestone, I can see it in here and on JEI. And because we've set our priorities earlier, I can pull out items here, and they will go into the correct slot. So that will go back into the drawer. If I pull all of my wool out, and then put it all back in, it should go into the chest down here. Perfect, it did. So that is the late side of early game where you've now got accessors for all of your storage options. Now you can actually move on to the Applied Energistics or refined storage routes. You can also skip this step entirely and actually move straight over to them. The only reason I suggested this is because it is a little bit easier to get on with. And with Applied Energistics, it's a really simple setup. You need to have the crafting terminal, the cable, and the storage bus, along with some sort of way of powering it. In this case, a single crystal resonance generator will actually power the whole system. You hook up the storage buses correctly like this, connect them all up with Fluix cable, place your crafting terminal anywhere on that line, and then power it with a resonance generator. This then gives you the access to all of your stuff. Again, I can't stress this enough, you have to set your priorities, so go into the storage bus and up the priority by a little bit, and then we'll also do it for this one over here. We may be up it by 10. And after you've done that, please just make sure that you test your system and make sure that's all working as intended. Right, that's perfect. Now the crafting terminal is a little bit difficult to make because it requires these processors which require the inscriber. I'm not going to cover the entire Applied Energistics mod because it's a little bit confusing, and I do want to do a separate video on that and auto crafting. So for now, I would advise you either craft the guide from Applied Energistics or watch another video on that. If you want to make the guide, it's really simple. You need to get a charger, not too difficult of a craft. You also need a hand crank, so just sticks and copper. Place the charger down, hand crank on top, and whack a book in there. Right click the hand crank a couple of times and you will get the guide. There we go. It turned into the guide, and now I can use this as my sort of gateway into the Applied Energistics mod. For the exact same setup, but in refined storage, you need to use the external storages here. Apply them on everything, add the cable, then the crafting grid, and you do need a controller. You can actually avoid the controller with Applied Energistics because you're going to be using less than 8 channels. But with the controller, you place it down and put some sort of energy source to the side of it, and now you've got the exact same setup again. Priorities are set directly on the external storage by just pressing here and by increasing the insert extract priority like that. So you don't need any of those confusing disks. You can literally just plug in your already existing storage into one of these AE or RS systems. I'm also going to show you an alternative to using all those sophisticated storage and drawers that I used in my last Let's Play, and it's actually quite good. I'm talking about the item vaults from Create. I showed this off in my tips and tricks video about how you can create them, but you can craft a 3x3 by 9 vault. Now each singular vault actually stores only 20 stacks of items. That is actually less than a chest. But when you combine all of these together, you actually end up with just one single storage thing that ends up being pretty massive. Do note there's currently a bug on the issue tracker to do with vaults. Specifically when a vault ends up spanning over chunk boundaries. If you press F3 and G, you can see these chunk boundaries. So when you do use this system, please make sure that if you're going to build one of these vaults, it doesn't span across 2 chunks like so. Your vault should just stay in one single chunk. Some people have said they've had items deleted over chunk borders. I never experienced this because I actually built all of my vaults inside one chunk, and I continued using vaults until the ATM star. Now if you want to know the equivalent of vault to sophisticated storage chest, this whole 9x3x3 vault is the same as 13 oak netherite chests. And look at the storage space in these. This is huge. It's got a scroll bar, that's how big it is. And it's 13 of these all combined together. And again, like I said, because it's all one inventory slot, you just need to simply add one of the blocks to this storage lectern, and you now have the whole entire thing connected in one block to this storage lectern. So the next thing I want to cover is this, the massive drawer wall. And if you've seen a lot of Let's Plays, people tend to have these. Now it isn't inherently bad to have one of these walls, but I'm saying you can actually make this a lot more compact. And I'll show you how in just a second. But what people tend to do is have, let's say, a mob farm. So here's the one that I made in my tips and tricks video, and it's all hooked up to the storage controller we saw earlier. And because they're all linked up, every time something goes into this storage controller, it appears on this drawer wall. But in my opinion, this is really messy. You can kind of compact this by using maybe the 2x2 oak drawers like this, but then you still have to have a load more upgrades to add to it. Also, if you were to then start adding the void upgrades, you'll end up being here for a while crafting an absolute ton of these, and they're quite expensive. They use a bit of obsidian. You craft an absolute ton of these, and every time you want to add a new drawer, drawer, you've got to add all the upgrades again and then add the void upgrades just to make sure it doesn't enter your actual main storage system. So I'm going to show you one technique and then a sort of mini tip on how to store this in a little bit more of a space efficient fashion. So this then leads me onto the big LED walls that I was talking about. We're in like mid to late game territory. And first I'm going to have to explain how disks work. This is probably where I lose half of you, but I really hope I can explain this well. Depending on which storage mod you go for, here's the exact same setup in both of those mods, refined storage's disks work very different to Applied Energistics. The storage disks here actually store direct items. So this storage disk will actually store 1024 of any item. That could be a complete stack of logs counting for 64, or it could be one sword counting as one item. But I'm going to be talking mostly about Applied Energistics. It just seems to be the one that's a bit more complex and a lot of people get lost when using it. Plus ATM 10 is actually mostly made for the Applied Energistics stuff. If you look at a lot of the recipes for the All Mod start, it does require these Applied Energistics stuff, so I'm going to cover that instead. But with Applied Energistics storage, it's split between bytes and types. Types are really simple, that's just individual different items. For example, you know, all these different types of wool here, that would be one type each. The bytes is the actual amount of stored items of those types. So here's a chest example of this. You've got 63 different types of items. I can have everything in different slots. But in terms of bytes, I can add more than one stack of these items, and that would increase the byte count. However, unlike chests, where you've got a slot set up, once this global byte cap's reached, no more items can be put in. Now, the way that bytes are calculated is a little bit confusing, but I'm going to quickly try to go through it. 8 individual items is equal to 1 byte. However, one type is also equal to 8 bytes. Meaning right now, I've got 2 lots of 8 items, and then 8 for white wool, which equals 10 bytes used. So if I have an entire stack of wool in here, that's 16, meaning 8 lots of 8, and then the 8 for the item type of wool. If I added 2 stacks, it would equal 24, meaning I'm using 16 bytes for the storage of the item quantity and 8 for the white wool. So if I add white wool again, that will be 32 bytes. I did tell you this was going to get confusing. And like I said before, the byte count is specifically for this cell. So if I max this out on white wool, I would not be able to add any more of the other types of wool that I want to actually add. Even though, as an example, I'm only using one of the 63 types. One of the best ways I can kind of explain this is if I've got a chest and I've filled it with white wool, I'm not actually able to add another slot. If I take an item out, now I can finally store my new type of item. So there's 2 things here. The first thing I want to do is set it so only the items from my mob farm can go into this disk specifically. I don't want to be storing my actual regular storage alongside an absolute ton of these bones, rotten flesh and gunpowder. The second thing I want to do is make sure that we're splitting the disk evenly between every single type of item that I'm actually storing. So similar to a chest, I want to make sure that every single item gets represented equally throughout. And Applied Energistics allows you to do both of these things by using something called the cell workbench. It's crafted like so, and when you go into the cell workbench, you can click on all of your items to partition a disk so that it only accepts those specific things. So now if I pull the disk out and then go back to my disk system and put it in, I should be able to store the bones, rotten flesh, but I shouldn't be able to store my other items. If I had other disks here, I could store them in there, but it won't let me put them into this partitioned drive. So this is now when I introduce the equal distribution card. It's not a difficult craft per se. What you do is you place that in there, and now it will partition this so that the storage is equally split between the partitioned items. So the entire 1024 bytes is now split between just these 3 items. I could also still keep adding items to this and it will split them equally between them. So I'm going to show an example here where I'm going to use something called an import bus next to a creative crate here that's going to spawn in infinite bones. I'll plop the import bus here, which means it's going to be importing those items into the drive. Now, right now there's no disk in there. I'm also going to add some acceleration cards so this is sped up significantly. And I'm actually going to duplicate this cell and I'm going to remove one of the equal distributions so we can test before and after. So if I place the one without the equal distribution, you'll see here it's now filling up the disk and it's actually just taking over the complete disk. You know, I'm not going to have any storage space for the other items. And there we go, we've now completely filled up the disk, got a red light there, and if I try to add any rotten flesh or gunpowder, it just will not let it. So I'm now going to remove this item and replace it with the one with the equal distribution card in it. And you can see it's only using 256 out of the 1024 bytes. That's because that's exactly a quarter, which is what we've partitioned this to be. So now I have enough space to actually start storing my rotten flesh, my oak logs, and I can actually store, well, clearly 1984 of them into this disk and it will be fine. But let's say we had a system like we did before where we have a storage bus connected. Well, what's going to happen is this is not going to be able to store it into the disk anymore, and it's now going to start inputting it into our external storage. Exactly the same problem that we had with the drawers. Now in the drawers case, we added void upgrades. Now there's a similar type of thing that you can add to the ME disks that do the exact same thing. So I'm going to take my partition drive out of this system, and I'm then going to put it into my cell workbench again. If I add the overflow destruction card, which again is not a difficult recipe, I then add it to the interface and then take out my storage cell. You'll see the upgrades are now in here. If I place this in my drive and I have a lower priority on my storage bus, meaning that it will try to fill the drive first, then it will try and fill the storage bus. You'll see that now I've taken out these bones from this chest, it's no longer filling up. But if I take some bones away, it will still add it. It will add it to this disk, and once it gets too full, it will void any more. So we've now got the same thing with that draw and void upgrade thing, but in just one block space. And technically, I can have 7 more of these different drives holding different items. So in this example, I'm going to try and take every single one of these items and put it into a disk drive. So I've opened up my 1K storage. I'm now going to partition every single one of these items in there. I'll also add my equal distribution card and my overflow destruction card, take it out and put it into my drive. And now if I place all of these items back into my system, you'll see they're now stored correctly. But you'll see the limit is now incredibly low. The limit is now 210 of each of these items. And that's because we only used a 1K storage item cell, the lowest tier. There's actually an absolute ton of them. So there's the 1K, 4K, 16K, and it goes all the way up to the millions, and then even the 256 million. Now, I don't know what mob farm you have, but if that's going to be able to store that, that's crazy. So let's say my mob farm's kind of built up a bit. I don't want to use maybe the 4K. I want to upgrade to, let's say, the 64K with 64 times the storage. How do I upgrade these cells? Well, what I would do in this case is actually disable the mob farm input for now, take out the disk, go into the cell workbench and place it back in. We can use this functionality here called the copy mode, and if I press this, I can then take my cell out and it retains all of the items. I can then place in the 64K and it's now partitioned in the exact same way as it was done with the 1K. Now I'm going to go and take the upgrades from this cell here, swap it out to the other cell, and then I'm going to add the upgrades in there. Now, Applied Energistics has this really useful thing called the MEIO port. If I just place that anywhere on my network, you'll see I can transfer from disks to network or networks to disk. Now, in this case, what I want to do is add my 1K back into the disk drive, and I want it to go from the network to this disk, and I want it to go directly into my brand new disk. So if I press that, what will happen is it will now try and import every single thing into my storage cell. So if I check my old storage cell, this should now be empty, which it is. And all of my items have now been cleanly stored back into this upgraded version here. I can then take this and put it back into my disk drive, reconnect up my mob farm by just adding back in that import bus. And now you can see there's a ton more storage. These bones are already going up to a larger number. You may be asking, now that I've got this kind of wasted 1K cell, what can I do? I can shift right click with it in my hand and I will get the empty cell housing and the 1K storage component back, to which I could just put it back in my system or upgrade it and do whatever. So this entire storage cell partitioned into 27 types out of the 63 allows us to store 13K of every single one of these items. That's like a drawer with at least one of the upgrades in. But we could upgrade this further. I use the 64K, you could use the 256, or you could even go into the mega item cell storage. Now, I think this is so much better than the drawer system. As much as it looks cool and you've got all of your items displayed, this is just so much easier. Adding a new item is as simple as taking out the cell, going over to the cell workbench, doing that, and then just adding it like so. Take it back out and pop it into the disk drive, and you've now partitioned a brand new item into this. Now, obviously in your system, you're not going to have this creative crate, so how would I hook up my existing mob farm's item collection into this? Well, there's 2 options I'm going to show. You've got the dimensional chest or you've got the ender chest. You could also just run a direct cable into a chest over there, but I think this way is just a bit neater. The way that the ender chests work is that you just dye them with the corresponding thing on the top and they will match. So in this case, they're all white, they now match and they open together. If I say, for example, blue, blue, red, and then add this one as blue, blue, red, they will also still open. If I change this to blue, 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 they are completely different. Now do know, in this mode, they're actually global, so anyone could put down one of these chests and steal all of your items from them. You can right click the latch with a diamond and that will now be the personal version of this, meaning that it's just directly to you. So you can see here ender chest and then there's my name. So now both of these are now linked to just your name on this one. Similarly, you've got the dimensional chest here where you can set the owner to public or your own name and change a frequency with just a number. And if they both match the same owner and frequency, then the items that appear in one will appear in the other. So in this example, all you need to do is just place in your ender chest with the corresponding frequency that you want, and I'm going to use the diamond here. Go back to your mob farm, unplug that system, and we're just going to plop in the ender chest here with the exact same frequency. Now, any items that go inside there will appear in this ender chest and be imported into our disk drive. Something I'm also going to cover is these infinity cells. Now, ATM has added a ton of these. For example, we've got water, we've got cobblestone, requiring a 16K ME storage. I mean, all these advanced ones do require some, 256 million, and the unobtainium alloys. So, for example, this cobblestone, what I can do is I can take out as much much as I want, and you'll see it stores the exact same. It's infinite. And if I place it back in, provided that it's going into this correct drive, it will actually void any additional ones going in. So if you do get into the stage where you're trying to store a lot of one item, just check that there's not an infinity cell, because there's an infinity cell for every single one of these items just here. But if you're using them, make sure that the priority on your disk drive that has the infinity cells is higher. So any new fluids or any new items of this type are going to go into there and be voided and just be infinite. So I also see people using compacting drawers a lot. And to be honest, I actually prefer using the compacting drawers, but I'm going to show you the equivalent in Applied Energistics. This is probably more likely your setup. You've got the compacting drawers mixed in with the controller here, and you'll have all of your metals in here as an example. So you've got the blocks, the ingots, and the nuggets. And accessing it from a chest, you know, you can pull out these, you can pull out those, you can add more, and you'll end up having all of these materials. Well, the way that you would do this in Applied Energistics is actually using the Mega Cell's Mega Bulk Item Storage Cell. It's crafted using the bulk storage component. It's quite expensive, using a 1 mil Mega Storage component and then a 2 cube spatial component. But to sum this up, it does bulk storage of just one item. So in this case, for example, it only has one slot in the cell workbench. So let's say you added your iron nuggets, it will now store a complete bulk of just iron nuggets. You can add this compression card, which now does the thing that we saw, where you can now have it go from iron nuggets to iron ingots to blocks of iron, and it can even go up here. This is the compression cutoff, so this will actually try and craft this 9 times iron block. Taking it out of the system, I can then place it into the drive, and now when I add iron nuggets, it will try and instantly convert them to the next tier up. So if I try and add blocks of iron, it will now convert them into 1x. If I add those, it'll try and convert into 2x, all the way up. One of the features is that if I shift click on one of these items, it will actually down stack the items. So it will now decompress those into 64 iron nuggets and then try and recompress it all the way back up when I shift in. However, if I didn't have any iron nuggets in the system, I then have to kind of manually craft it. So if I pull them all out, I can get that and then manually craft my iron nuggets. That's cool, but any of the auto crafting will not actually register iron nuggets as being craftable. So the way that you need to do that is by adding a mega decompression module, and you can add that anywhere. It takes up a channel, but you can literally add it facing a wall. So now I can actually see all of the recipes that I can get. So even if I don't have nuggets, I can shift click and I will still be able to get nuggets. Now, one thing to note, if I did have an auto crafting system and let's say I tried to craft 64 of them, it's actually going to craft them, but instantly try and convert them back into the block form. So the only real way to get them is by just shift clicking out of your system, which to be honest is why I prefer the compacting drawer setup. It's easier to set up. I can just whack it into my storage controller and it doesn't require partitioning a single cell for every single one of my materials here. But I thought I'd show it as an option because technically you can store an absolute ton, but I still believe that this option's better with all of the upgrades added. So there we go. That is my optimal strategy from early game to late game storage, showing off the basics of how to upgrade your chests and what to go for, to then using controllers and depositing, to then implementing something like an accessor so that you can grab your items in a terminal style layout. Eventually working your way up to the crazy LED systems that I showed earlier, where you can store so many items in just this one cell in one drive. I hope that made a bit more sense, and hopefully that's kind of cleared up some of the confusion about Applied Energistics for you. People often find the AE2 cell storage quite daunting, hence why they tend to go for the refined storage systems. People just tend to use those drawer walls, and I think people aren't aware of the other options available. So if you did enjoy this video, please remember to hit like and subscribe. If you've learned anything new or something you weren't aware of, just let me know in the comments. It really does help. And if there's something that you want demystifying or explaining, just let me know and I'll try and make a video on it next time. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Take care.